thank you all for joining tonight, and I hope you get something out of this presentation. And I know Maureen mentioned after each section, I will kind of stop and ask if anyone has questions, so feel free to ask in the Q&A box. So just to briefly go over the agenda, I'll go over the creation of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman at a federal level throughout the United States. I'll explain the role of a long-term care ombudsman, and then kind of branch off and talk about the Maine Long-Term Care Ombudsman programs. We have specific programs that are different from other states, and ours is kind of structured a little bit differently than other states. And then we'll go over resident rights. I'll explain the 8 resident rights, and I'll explain the reactive and proactive problem-solving strategies that I like to go over with residents and staff in facilities, and then breeze through some scenarios and solutions. Then I'll have some resources for you, and then we can follow up with any last questions that you might have. So the Ombudsman program sort of started in the 60s when people kind of realized that the situation in nursing homes was abysmal. There was a lot of rampant neglect and abuse going on. So in 65, Congress passed the Older Americans Act, and that sort of allowed for community programs, research, and training across the country. And then in 72, they wanted to try some demonstration projects for the Ombudsman program. And initially there were 4 or 5 states that signed on, and then an additional 2 in 73, which sort of changed the whole trajectory of the Ombudsman program. And then in 75, amendments were made to authorize funding for state ombudsman programs. Every state is required to have a ombudsman program, a long-term care ombudsman program by federal law. But it's up to the individual state to decide how they implement that program. So the role of a long-term care ombudsman is we're a specially trained advocate to resolve complaints about long-term care consumers. And most of these complaints are either from families or the residents themselves about rights violations, care concerns, issues with state services. Most are around resident rights violations. Our services are free and confidential. And part of that, a big part of it, is our federal mandate is to take direction from a legal decision maker or the resident themselves. So if a resident does not have capacity to make their own decisions, then we need to have a POA or a guardian involved to take direction from. We do not accept the surrogacy law as a legal decision maker, but each is a case-by-case basis, and we don't take any action without express agreement from the resident or their decision maker. Next slide. So what do we actually do? So we resolve complaints made by residents of long-term care facilities. That could be nursing homes, assisted living, and residential care settings. We educate consumers and long-term care providers about resident rights. So we do in-service presentations for staff in facilities. Part of the end of this presentation is a brief snapshot of what I do in facilities. It's more interactive, and I do give them almost impossible scenarios to try and solve. But we promote community involvement through volunteer opportunities. We have a volunteer program We're federally mandated to be in every facility once per quarter, so every 3 months. And Maine is one of the smaller states, and we still have over 300. So it, we have less than 20 staff that go and do these monitoring visits. So it's quite a task. So we have a volunteer program that helps with those monitoring visits. They can often be in these facilities a lot more than we can. We also provide information to the public on nursing homes and other long-term care services, resident rights, and legislative and policy issues. We do work with the legislature and testify on any bills that are that have something to do with the long-term care community, long-term care consumers, or in Maine, the hospital program and home care. We are advocates for resident rights and quality care in nursing homes. And we promote the development of citizen organizations, family councils, and resident councils. So we participate in family council meetings and resident council meetings, but we need to be invited. We also participate in citizen organizations like elder abuse task forces, healthcare crimes. We coordinate with area agencies on aging, and other agencies that work with the same population. So Maine differs a little bit from other state programs because we're a nonprofit, as opposed to a lot of other states being tied to other agencies like APS or the Office of Aging and Disabilities. Some are tied to state-run legal services programs, and they're in the same building as like a DHHS office. Whereas we are totally separate and we're nonprofit. We also have 2 other additional programs that other states don't have. I think we're maybe the only one that has a hospital program, and I'll talk briefly about that as well. But we work with patients that are in hospitals and have pretty significant barriers to discharge. We also have a home care ombudsman that works with consumers in the community that are having issues with either accessing home care or finding services or DME or really anything that they would need at home. So I'll pause briefly if anyone has questions.
I don't see any questions right now, Chris, in the chat box.
Okay, I'll keep going. So I'll talk about the hospital program. Oh. So I do have a question. Staff of 20 for 300 facilities, how are volunteers chosen and what are they responsible for? That's a good question. So volunteers are vetted for any bias or conflict of interest. They can't have been couldn't have been a staff at a facility. They wouldn't be able to work in a facility where a family member lived or a friend, and they go through a pretty extensive training process with a regional ombudsman in that area. Our volunteer program manager, they learn about the ombudsman program, they learn about what kind of cases we work and what our federal mandates sort of entail. They don't actually work the cases. They present in a facility to make sure that residents have access to the ombudsman program, and if anything does come up, they may be able to provide resources to them. And we also coordinate as a regional ombudsman. We coordinate with them and check in once a month or more to really just see how things are going in the facility. Because we only get, as a regional ombudsman, we get the cases that are actually needing work. We don't get all of the complaints that are coming in. That goes through our intake process. So that's a good question. And honestly, the staff of 20, not all of those are regional ombudsmen. So it's quite less than that. I would say close to 10 that do actual monitoring visits. Personally, I do 20 or 30 every month if I can. But my areas are quite close together, so I can get a few done. Obviously, COVID has changed things quite a bit, but I hope that answered the question. It's a good question. So I'll go on to the hospital program. So in 2015, the Maine Hospital Association did a survey to look at some of the problems with these long stay patients. And they indicated a lot of problems. Older adults and adults with disabilities, dementia, behavioral challenges, mental illness, being under 60 years old. In the hospital program world, that's young. Which is odd, I know, but there are facilities out there that have an age limit of either 65 or 70. So that can be quite difficult. High acuity or the need for bariatric care. So high acuity, that can mean anything from complex medical diseases, vents, trachs, any significant amount of care, no decision maker, and then issues with main care eligibility. We see that quite a bit. So we've been successful with patients that are ready for discharge and have pretty significant barriers. We've had several referrals from out-of-state hospitals with Maine residents. I currently have one in Georgia, one in Texas, one in Virginia, and 2 in Mass, who are trying to get back to Maine. We work with patients, the hospital discharge planners, DHHS, and other providers to address these barriers and overcome obstacles. We always obtain written consent, especially for the hospital program. We can take verbal permission to start working on things, but obviously outside providers, even DHHS, who we work with a lot, they are going to need written permission to share any information. So what we do is we review the patient's status and goals for discharge, and also their history sometimes. So if they're very complex and they have a pretty significant history of hospitalizations and no one really knows, the origin of a behavior or, what works. It's a lot of medication issues. We work to assist the hospital discharge planners in navigating that. There are also, we see a large disconnect between the hospitals and what they view as a nursing home life would be like. So we see issues pop up quite a bit, where they'll be administering IM Haldol to hospital patients, where obviously that cannot be done in a nursing home setting. There are also, medication issues that facilities can't deal with. So if someone has a diagnosis of dementia and they have pretty significant barriers, a hospital may, prescribe an antipsychotic, and facilities, at least in Maine, really need to look at who is assigned prescribed an antipsychotic, and if they have a diagnosis that warrants that prescription. So there are a lot of things that we catch right off the bat that hospitals don't really think about. So this is some brief data from 2021. So we had a total of 223 cases, most of which were nursing facility cases. A lot of those were for skilled nursing facilities, and then a smaller portion were for res care, which res care and assisted living are, at least in Maine, considered the same level of care. The referral sources, a vast majority, are from the hospital. Then, patients, family, and other could be outside providers, whether it be a facility has sent someone to the hospital and they're not willing to take them back, but they really want the hospital to do something before they return. It could be, case managers in the community that reach out to us with someone in the hospital, or other agencies in the community. Location prior to the hospital, a lot of them are from the community, and this is because a lot of the cases that we get are a sudden illness or event like a stroke or a fall, spinal cord injury, something traumatic that happens, and nobody planned for it, and they don't have any insurance in place to be able to start planning the long-term care process. A lot of these people don't have the ability to take these complex patients home after a pretty significant injury or illness. A lot of them were from facilities. Unfortunately, we get quite a bit that are discharged from facilities for either behaviors or illness, and the facility refuses to take them back. Facilities know that is not a safe discharge, and it goes against their resident rights. It still happens for sure. That's when we get involved and advocate for them by appealing a discharge, working with a facility to try and get them back if that's what they want, or to look for alternative placement if that's what they want. Some of the barriers are broken down here. Behavior, that is quite a significant amount, and it's also varied quite a bit depending on the diagnosis, and really all that kind of goes into that. Substance use, mental health, certainly cognition, homelessness, age is big. If you've ever tried to get someone who's under 30 years old or under 35 or even under 40 into a nursing home, it's very difficult. And we also get INRs, which are information and referrals. So those are the cases that come to us, and maybe we don't actually open a case. Some of the reasons were the patient wouldn't consent. So, a hospital would make the referral, and we would explain, we need permission from the patient, and they say they don't need help or they don't want our help. So we don't open a case. No capacity or no decision maker, that happens quite a bit. Hospitals will make a referral to us and then, submit what we have in Maine, a PP 505 or a white paper or blue paper, basically saying this person is a danger to themselves or others, and they can't make their own decisions, and APS gets involved to determine capacity and maybe assign a state guardian or something. And we can't get involved because there's no decision maker, and they've claimed that this patient cannot make their own decisions. There are some situations where we go in and we make that sort of determination ourselves, but that is quite rare. just wanted information. They were placed before we could actually do anything, or they passed away. And then there's the criminal history. So that's a part of it where we approach it case by case, on a case by case basis. If someone is a sex offender, we really look at, are they a danger to other residents? And we won't take a case if they are potentially a danger to other residents, because it does conflict with our overall mandate to respect resident rights. And we can't advocate for a situation that's going to put people at risk. And that goes for advocating for a plan that a resident might think that they can go ahead with, and there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that it would be an unsafe situation. So we're not mandated reporters. We're not going to stop them from pursuing something that they may think is safe and it's in the hospital, or everyone else is saying is not safe, but we won't certainly advocate for that. I wanted to go back and mention one other thing too. So the last one is they needed a mental health PNMI, which is a mental health group home, an intellectual disability group home. We don't work on those cases. There is another group at DHHS called the Complex Case Unit. They work with folks that have need a mental health PNMI or an intellectual disability group home, or if they are under 18. We do work with people that have brain injuries and what we call other related conditions here in Maine. It's a waiver that we have through our Maine Care. That's things like cerebral palsy, MS, multiple sclerosis, and other neurological conditions. So I'll stop here to see if anyone has any questions about the hospital program. All right. Well, if anyone does, feel free to ask at any time. But I'll move on to resident rights. So when I do these trainings with facilities, I like to have them get in the mindset of either being someone that is transitioning into a facility, or being a loved one, or being a mother or a daughter that is sending a loved one into a facility, and that can be really difficult. There's a lot of loss that goes along with that, loss of possessions, independence. Each person deals with it quite differently, and staff are a really important part of that transition. They can make it quite easy, or they can make things quite difficult. Understanding the process and understanding what people are going through during that transition can help sort of ease that transition, and also the planning beforehand. So I'll go over the 8 resident rights. So the first one is a right to a dignified existence, being treated with dignity and respect, freedom from restraints, quality of life. That's having a home-like environment. Their quality of life is maintained. They can exercise their rights. Freedom from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And then there's the right to self-determination. So that's the ability to sort of choose what you would like to do during the day. Your healthcare providers, your physician, having reasonable accommodations to needs and preferences, you're having the choice to designate a person to make decisions for you if it comes to that. Requesting, refusing, and or discontinuing treatment. And then there's the right to be fully informed of the type of care, changes to any plans or medical and health status. Be fully informed of resident rights and resources. That's, access to the Ombudsman Program, the state regulation agency, and written notice for any change that is going to occur. Then there's the right to raise grievances. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just to the ability to express concerns without fear of retaliation or discrimination, and then prompt effort by the facility to resolve those grievances, and then access to the Ombudsman Program to assist and advocate in any grievances. And there's the right of access to the individuals, services, community members, activities, visitors, personal and medical records, any durable medical equipment, or any other devices to assist, participate in social, religious, and community activities. Then there's the right to regarding financial affairs. So that's to be informed of any services, charges, costs of care, payer source access, their personal needs funds. In Maine, per month, if someone is on long-term care, Maine care in a residential care or assisted living setting, they have a personal needs allowance of $70 a month after they pay their cost of care, and that's out of their whole income. And in a nursing facility, it's only $40. So any additional charges to them by a facility for, we're seeing Wi-Fi now, phones. So there are certain things that facilities will try and charge on top of their cost of care, and we certainly get involved in any of those concerns. Then there's the right to privacy. So that's in every facet of life: personal, financial, medical, and then unrestricted communication with any person of their choice. That's during care, during treatment, and any time that they would like privacy. The last one is a big one we deal with as well. It's the rights during transfer and discharge. There's a pretty significant part of the regulations for nursing homes that are given by the federal CMS guidelines on what needs to happen or what residents have for rights during a discharge and transfer. They need to be notified in advance, given appeal rights, and the facility is responsible for a safe discharge plan. And you would be surprised how many facilities do not know of any of these. We see facilities just trying to discharge people to motels or to the hospital and refusing to take them back. So we help with that appeal process. We help negotiate with facilities to try and get them back, try and work out a care plan that would be suitable for everyone involved. Those are a lot of cases that come up with the hospital program as well. So then we'll talk about two types of problem solving, reactive and proactive. And I want to just mention, because during one of my in-services, people took reactive as a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you are trained properly to be able to handle things in a reactive way. So reactive problem solving is solving problems in response to an incident. I'll pause for this question. So the question is, how do you happen to get clients from Mass, Texas, or other states? That is a good question. So we work with Maine residents in other states that are trying to come back to Maine. For instance, I have someone that we tried finding placement for him years ago in Maine. And at the time, his medical complexities and behaviors, he was sort of blacklisted from a lot of facilities, and he went to Florida. Now he would like to see if he can return to Maine. So we help assist people, get from there to Maine. A lot of the ones that are in the New England area, what happens is they are living on the border. Something happens, like a stroke, and they're sent to a New Hampshire or a Massachusetts hospital for rehab, and they end up not being able to return home. So they need long-term care, and to get that, they need long-term care Maine care. So they need our type of insurance and to try and find facilities. And we find it helpful, certainly, for the out-of-state hospitals, because a lot of their discharge planners and case managers aren't as familiar with how to apply for long-term care Maine care. What are some of the waiver services that are offered in Maine? And they don't have any established relationships with facilities in Maine. So that's why it's helpful for us to get involved. And also there's a handful of us that are familiar with these state-to-state transfers. I've done a handful of them, so I know kind of how it works, and I can help kind of talk other hospitals and people in other states through it. It is more difficult for sure, but we get them quite a bit. And then there's the people that are in other states and they have family in Maine, and maybe a loved one in that other state that they're living in passed away, and now they need long-term care. Maybe that person was their caregiver and they don't have one, so they really need long-term care, and their only family is in Maine. Even if they're not a Maine resident, and say they have someone in Maine and they really want to get to Maine, we'll get involved in that case. An example that is actually just moving to Maine today from Georgia. I worked with a couple that were living in residential care in Georgia, and their daughter lives in Maine, and they really want to get back to Maine. They lived here quite a while ago. And the problem there was they really wanted to find the same facility to live in and hopefully to room together. So, I mean, that's why, we get involved, and I've helped them connect with a facility that I have a good relationship with, and I knew would be a good fit because they were different levels of care. And so I sort of fostered that relationship between them and the facility, and they eventually approved them, and they moved today. So follow up. I knew it was too good to be true. My hospital system has severe problems with this type of client. We keep them for eons. It happens here too. And the hospital does absorb the cost. So in Maine, we're working on a bill right now to extend what we call days awaiting placement for people that are on our Maine Medicaid, Maine care, that need residential care or nursing home placement, that are stuck in the hospital. And just for that process where they're medically ready to go, there's no acute medical need for them to be in the hospital, and they are approved for Maine care. Maine care will pay the going rate or the average rate for a residential care or an assisted living or nursing home for that patient. So it's not what they would get from insurance for an acute patient, but it is certainly something, and I think it's a good response to the amount of long stay patients that are still in the hospital. I mean, we only have a few right now that I think are around 300 days in the hospital. But I mean, that's only a snapshot of what's actually in the hospital. And especially during COVID, hospitals were so backed up. And we can talk about that for hours, but I'll go back to the reactive problem solving. So reactive problem solving, it's taken during the moment or shortly after in an attempt to resolve a situation. The outcomes can vary depending on experience or training, and leadership too, as well, in the facility. It is typically an emotional response, but like I said, with training and experience, that response to a stressful situation can be better than someone with no training or no experience. It's crucial because it sets the stage for the proactive solutions and for positive outcomes, and it can be strengthened by reflecting on an event and thinking ahead to determine what worked and what could be improved upon. On the other side, proactive problem solving is solving problems in preparation for potential future incidences. This is driven by a continued improvement perspective and not always in direct response to a situation. It can also be done by reflecting on how we react to an incident and analyzing what measures could be put in place to prevent it in the future. Solutions sometimes require brainstorming or out-of-the-box thinking. It's important to take time for this step. Without proactive problem solving, not only would preventable issues continue to arise, but we'd rely on constant reactive solutions. And I see that a lot. I see that being something in facilities, at least, that comes up quite a bit because they're overworked already and they're short-staffed, so they sometimes don't have enough time. And especially with, maybe inexperienced leadership or just lack of leadership, they forget this step and they're constantly putting out fires. So we'll talk about example scenarios. I'll stop briefly just in case anyone has questions. Okay. So for each of the scenarios, I want you to think about which resident rights are applicable. What is one reactive solution, and what might be a proactive solution to use in the future? So this is Walter. Walter was given a video calling device by his daughter so they could stay in touch. I'll preface this by all of these are true. All of these are actual scenarios that I've dealt with, and I can kind of go over what actually happened as well. So he was given a video calling device by his daughter so they could stay in touch because in-person visits weren't possible at this time. So during COVID, visitation was stopped. People could do window visits, but that posed a whole other issue. And it was really difficult for some residents, maybe depending on their cognitive capacity or any maybe dementia diagnosis or something that was just not effective for them. He has a cell phone, but due to cognitive and physical issues, it's difficult for him to use it effectively. So they decided to try something new. Staff noticed the device answers with voice commands and that other staff and or residents could be in the picture during a call. The facility told Walter he couldn't use the device due to the privacy of staff and other residents. Both Walter and his daughter are very upset They've had little to no contact since the device was removed. So this was something that sort of came up because of COVID. I did a kind of a deep dive into the regulations for nursing homes and residential care and assisted living, and there's really nothing on these video calling devices because it's a new thing, and these regulations are somewhat outdated. There's nothing in there. So we had to work with licensing on this case for sure. So which resident rights are applicable in this scenario? So it's the right of privacy, to have private contact with any person they choose, right of access, so access to family members and visitation, which was obviously denied, and that was a CMS guidance issue, but facilities are still responsible for allowing access in other ways. Right to self-determination. That was just the choice of being able to have this device in their room and to be able to use it whenever they felt it was necessary. So a reactive solution, initially, this is what we came up with, is we suggested a bunch of alternatives, just trying to problem solve, to find a suitable location in the room to put the device so it was facing the wall and the hallway or out the window, depending on where they were positioned in the room. Walter had a roommate, so it just couldn't be pointed at the roommate because the roommate could not be seen on the camera. Second one was to discuss the device with the resident and his roommate, so the roommate understood and could consent. The roommate didn't care, and the facility knew, and they still restricted it. They also had some concerns about staff being on the camera, which technically that is allowed, and also the hallways are allowed to be on the camera as well. So we explained to Walter that it cannot be used while staff provide care. That was fine. He didn't want that anyways, so that wasn't an issue. So then a proactive idea was to update the facility policy to reflect modern devices that allow for video chats with a focus on maintaining resident rights and to educate staff and residents on the new policy. So what actually happened in this case was we talked with the facility. They agreed to come up with a policy. It took several weeks. And, after week 2 of there being no resolution, I went back to them and said, while you're making this policy with your corporate entity and all of their, the legal team, is there some way that we can make this work? So that's when we came up with, the solution, which I had brought up to them, I think within the first week, was to find a location in the room where it wouldn't really interfere with the resident. And they didn't really have any other concerns to talk about. They mentioned recording, which, the device did not do. There was a way to turn that off too. They had concerns about if the resident's roommate could be heard on the video and not seen. And that was sort of a ridiculous remark, because someone could be on speakerphone on a cell phone and hear someone from down the hall, hear another resident, and that's not a resident rights violation or anything. But so that it was a lot of back and forth with the facility, talking to our division of licensing, which is our regulatory agency here, to determine what they were allowed to do, and come up with a plan within that parameter that would work for Walter, and everything turned out great. And then eventually they did come up with a policy. So on to the next one, Margaret. Margaret carries the diagnosis of dementia and PTSD from an abusive relationship in her past. She's very scared and uncomfortable with male CNAs or male staff giving her a shower or providing any personal care, but they're often assigned to her due to low staffing in the facility. During a recent incident, Margaret assaulted a male staff member when they tried to help her out of bed. Although her daughter addressed this concern during the care plan meeting, nothing was changed in the care plan. When she tried to tell the facility in the past, she was told there was nothing they could do because they're short-staffed. This is a tough one. You certainly see this quite a bit. Resident rights are applicable. Right to a dignified existence. So that's, the freedom from abuse and exploitation and maintaining someone's quality of life. And that certainly applies here. Right to self-determination, the choice of activities and, who provides care to you. And that's she was certainly trying to exercise that right for quite a bit. What is a reactive solution to resolve the issue? To encourage Margaret and her daughter to request another care plan meeting to discuss that specific concern. Offer to have LTCOP, the Ombudsman Program, attend in support of Margaret and explain Margaret's right to feel safe during her shower and really any care, and the responsibility of the facility to ensure her needs and preferences are met. So in this actual case, they did do that. I did meet with the facility and Margaret and her family, and we made sure that it was directly put into the care plan. It hadn't been in the past, which was their mistake, and they did own up to that. And they did agree to have a female staff available at all times to work with Margaret. What's a proactive idea? To make sure all staff are aware of this preference. That male staff was not aware, and that staff member, his supervisor, did not make him aware of that, despite knowing that it had been requested many times by Margaret's daughter, but they failed to inform all staff of this issue, which resulted in an uncomfortable situation for Margaret and really everyone involved, and it could have easily been prevented. But they agreed to ensure that at least one female staff member was on the unit at all times. I believe this is the last one. So this is Diane. Diane and Denise are both residents in the same nursing home. Over the past several months, they've developed a romantic relationship and recently requested to become roommates. Both have the diagnosis of dementia, but there are no concerns of decisional capacity. There is an open room, but the facility will not let them move in together because Diane's son refuses to agree to the arrangement. He is still very close with Diane's ex-husband and his father, and claims he has the right to refuse the room change because he's her POA. This was a difficult situation to deal with. I mean, initially, what we did was we went in and I met with Diane and Denise, and they assured me that this was a consensual relationship. They both had decision-making capacity. So, in my mind, it was their decision to request being roommates, and the facility decided to just take direction from the POA, which is not how POA works. And we'll go over that in a moment. But which resident rights are applicable? This is the right to a dignified existence and the right to privacy. What is a reactive solution? Was to remind the facility of Diane and Denise's right to live together and to choose who they room with in the facility if it is logistically possible to do so, and it was. So we encouraged all parties to meet and discuss the concern, but point out that the decision is ultimately up to Diane and Denise. So we did do that. I talked with Diane's son privately and sort of explained all of this. I got permission from Diane to do this beforehand as well. And so I kind of explained and said, I understand where you're coming from, but at this point, it is Diane and Denise's choice to live together, and they want to room together. And he was not necessarily happy with it, and still tried to push the POA thing on the facility, which is why the proactive approach was to remove Diane's son from the care plan, make sure that all staff and administrative staff knew that he was still POA, but he is not able to make decisions for her until she loses the ability to make decisions for herself. And that was initially in that power of attorney paperwork what her wishes were. And they did not read that power of attorney paperwork and chose to take direction from the son. So I believe that is the last one. Before I go on to resources, we do have a question. What next steps are taken if residents' family concerns are not addressed in a timely manner? I'm going to assume that this is in terms of, or by the facility. So what can be done is, we can put pressure on the facility. They need to share information with us, and they need to take steps to resolve any resident rights issues. If not, then we talk with the resident or family member and suggest or offer any further options of submitting a complaint to the Division of Licensing or the state regulatory agency. We actually help people submit complaints to the Division of Licensing, and we monitor and we get updates from them on any investigation or citations or anything. But typically, typically facilities do, with the right amount of pressure, get things done in a timely manner. And we don't have any actual power. Don't tell anyone that. We have sort of the perceived power because we do work with a lot of the state agencies out there. We have really good relationships with them. And we don't go into these situations, in a conflicting manner. It's more of a mediation, and we want to try and preserve any relationship that we have with facilities as well. We approach it as, we're on the same page, where it's their job to make sure that they're respecting resident rights, and it's our job to advocate for them. So, we're sort of on the same page, and, how can we resolve this together? So I hope that answers your question. But I did want to mention a few resources. So our website is a good resource, not just for Maine as well, but we have a lot of links on there for really just the whole long-term care community. The Administration on Community Living, that's the federal agency that sort of regulates the Ombudsman program. Same with the National Consumer Voice. They are an agency advocating for quality long-term care services and supports. They work closely with us as well. CMS, Resident Rights and Quality Care. This is a good deep dive into nursing home resident rights, kind of goes into sample scenarios and just gives a lot of good information, and it's applicable anywhere in the US. And then the last one is a ProPublica nonprofit website. It's a database that has all of the nursing facilities, citations, deficiencies, fines, and vaccination rates for all facilities in the country. And that's a good resource. I think I suggest that to people when they're looking for facilities and they ask, is this facility a good facility? We're not allowed to make that subjective determination. We don't share opinions on if a facility is good or not. So we like to share all of these public databases that have all of those deficiencies and outcomes of surveys. So this is my contact info. Feel free to reach out if you have questions for any follow-up at any time. And thank you for having me.
Are there any other questions? Oh, there is a question, Chris, it looks like.
I whenever that next steps, if they're not addressed in a timely manner.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions for Chris?
Thank you, Jamie.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. That was very informative. I think you might have said this, but I mean, we're lucky here in Maine, we have an ombudsman program, but if you live in one of the other New England states, how would you access services similar to yours?
I mean, you can just Google your state and long-term care ombudsman program. Every state will have one.
Okay.
Not every state does everything that we do, and a lot of them will have like regional offices too. I know, like, for instance, Florida, they have like 20 different offices, just because they're so big and they cover such a vast amount of facilities. But in Maine, we have one office and we cover the whole state.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Well, thank you. That was very informative, and thank you for all the people in your office that help all kinds of people and help us in our daily roles. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.